Afternoon, how are you? Thank you for holding out and taking time, especially. So, I'm going to focus on a particular pasuk that Shlomo HaMelech, Hacham Kol Adam, the wisest man who ever lived. So it's not really opinions that he's sharing. This is really what we claim as Ruach HaKodesh. He had divine inspiration, and he famously tells us, it's in Mishlei chapter 15, verse 15, so it's easy to remember, 15:15. It says, Kol Yemei Ha'ani Ra'im. All the days of the poor man are bad. So at first glance you think, well, do I need the wisest of all men to tell me that if you can't pay the bills and behind on the mortgage or rent or the lease and anything else, that my debts that I'm servicing, so do I really need the wisest man of all time to tell me all the days of the poor man are ra'im, one bad after the other because it's plural? So typically it's the second half of the same verse that turns around my understanding of what his intent was in the first place. So usually you and I, we would look at the word ani as a poor person, and the association is, well, finances. Doesn't have all the physical needs, can't afford, and that is what we typically think of as an ani. But as you now unpack the second half of the same verse, chapter 15, verse 15, in Mishlei, all of a sudden there's a whole new perspective. V'toiv leiv. As we know, the word leiv, the vast majority of times, actually refers to mind. Toiv leiv, a good mind, mishteh tamid, is at a constant banquet. Mishteh is Beit HaMishteh is a place of drinking, but it's a reference for partying. That's what Beit HaMishteh constantly means throughout Tanakh, and typically they would drink there, but that's what a Beit HaMishteh really refers to. So a good mind is at a constant party. So to unpack this a little bit more, now we understand that the ani that we're referring to, the poor man, is not poor necessarily financially. He could actually be extremely wealthy, but if his mind is not a good mind, and we're going to see what does that mean, then his whole life is one string of complaints about what's not good in one's life. I was giving a presentation on multiple intelligence a couple of years ago. It's a working theory that the vast majority of educators embrace. It says, "Oh my gosh, that's true." That's not a theory. That's how I experience education in the classroom. Multiple intelligence, some of you are probably familiar, is the claim that every single child has a different starting point in not just one intelligence under the umbrella of academics, but multiple intelligences. And Dr. Howard Gardner, who's popularized multiple intelligence, he's kind of dubbed as the father of it, but actually he got written permission. Did I share this with you? Yeah. He got written permission from the real father of multiple intelligence. I'm going to share with you soon who that person is, because it's actually quite fascinating. So there's Howard Gardner. He's popularized multiple intelligence that makes the claim that you have, let's say, language intelligence, mathematical intelligence. There's something called spatial intelligence. There's kinesthetic intelligence. There's musical intelligence, and there's ultimately, which kind of steals the show, is emotional intelligence. So we're going to look at these very briefly for a few seconds each. Mathematical intelligence is the acute awareness. Acute means I'm paying attention to detail. Acute awareness of numbers. So a child, 3-4 years old, who's introduced to a symbol, this is a 4, and they learn the relative quantity of a 1 in contrast to a 2 and a 3 and a 4, and they recognize that these symbols are quantities representing quantities, and that there's a pattern or relationship between these quantities. A child who's mathematically intelligent, or as the term would be used, gifted in math, will typically do very well becoming an accountant, actuary. Mathematical intelligence also counts for seeing patterns, sequencing. You've got something called language intelligence. Language intelligence is acute awareness. Those are the two key words. Acute awareness of words and their multiple meanings. So according to this definition, you can actually have a child completely failing English, terrible at grammar, even worse at spelling, and yet gifted in language. Because they have such an acute awareness of words and their multiple meanings. They can be failing in spelling, that's not a problem. According to this definition, they have such a strong command that they are very persuasive. Leaders typically are very good with language intelligence. Good teachers are typically gifted in language intelligence. Sometimes lawyers are that way. Politicians are language intelligent. I think that's the only intelligence they have, but that's not politically correct to say. So language intelligence, typically good salespeople are language intelligent. So there's really a lot hanging on that. Then you've got something called musical intelligence. This actually is probably the most penetrating of all intelligences. It's acute awareness of sound. So you've got tempo, beat, rhythm. Someone, a child, and later on an adult, who's got an acute awareness of sound, typically picks up an instrument very easily or can compose very easily because they have an acute awareness of so there's a Professor Suzuki, you can Google him, he's a fascinating personality. He has a school of music in Tokyo, I believe, and if you want to sign up your child, not you personally, but if someone wants to sign up their child, they have to do so before pregnancy. During pregnancy, they have to play the same concerto, it might be a Mozart, a Beethoven, whatever it would be, thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Then after the child's born, they have to continue playing the same concerto thousands of times till the child is about 4 years old. Round about 4 years old, they're brought to Professor Suzuki for the first time, and he gives them a violin to the scale of the chest of the child, and the only thing the child actually has to learn is the movement of the bow against the strings of the violin that matches the sounds that this child already has inside his mind. Then in a matter of weeks and months, not years and years and years of practice, in a matter of weeks and months, this child is playing a perfect Mozart concerto in front of an audience of several thousand adults. And you're looking at these 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, and the first gut reaction of the adults is their jaws just fall open. They can't believe these young children are playing such an amazing pianists and cello and violins, and it's mind-blowing. And what Professor Suzuki has really showed us is that if you expose a child's mind to subtle differences in sound and tempo, rhythm, beat, then any child who's exposed to that enough will actually have such an acute awareness, so sensitive to these variations in sound, that they can pick up any instrument and very easily pick up other instruments and play and even compose. So it's interesting that musical intelligence really is so penetrating because it plays such a huge role in Judaism. In fact, you couldn't even bring a carbon unless the Leviim were singing and playing the instruments in the Beis HaMikdash. There was a minimal number of Leviim that had to be singing, and it went up to several thousand. And they actually practiced for 5 years, both the singing and the playing of instruments, before they would be screened as qualified to work in the Beis HaMikdash. Music, the language of the soul, is so powerful that I'm a little bit older than most of you here, all of you here. I still remember lyrics that I've never heard in a good, let's say 50 years, but because I heard it so many times to a tune, whether it was a commercial or actually it might have been, I don't know, the Beatles, but I would remember the lyrics straight away, and I haven't done any chazar, I didn't review since then, but that's the power of music. It has such a deep penetration into the mind/soul of the human being. You're going to see how this relates to what we're going to get to in a few moments. So that's musical intelligence. Then you have kinesthetic intelligence, also known as body intelligence. So you can have children who've got very good hand-eye coordination, throwing a ball, running. Dancers, professional dancers are kinesthetically intelligent. They might have a very good starting point in this physical coordination of their limbs, and as they practice or develop that, they actually become gifted or are gifted to start with, and then become even Olympic gold medalists because their starting point is so high in kinesthetic intelligence. Spatial intelligence is the acute awareness of space, height, breadth, color, contrast, shade. So typically, graphic artists in general are gifted in spatial intelligence. Architects are usually gifted in spatial intelligence. So once you know these intelligences, and this has a lot to do actually with Montessori, because she was big into following the Pasuk, Hanach Na Pi Darka. That was the mission statement of Montessori, believe it or not, taken from King Solomon, which means that the child has a derech. The child has strengths. The child has areas they are probably gifted in, and if we know what those are, and it doesn't take that long to pick up a few clues, all you have to actually do, if you've never met the kid before, is ask what do they enjoy. What do you like doing in recess? What's your favorite game? Why? What do you like playing when you get home? What do you like doing over the weekend? What do you do in the summer? What was your favorite thing you did in the summer? And the children, when they're taken interest in, they're only too happy to share what they love, what they're good at, what they like. So the one intelligence I'm going to home in on now, which is what we're going to pay attention to, is emotional intelligence. This is English vocabulary, but I'm going to share with you the equivalents in Lashon HaKodesh in a few moments. Emotional intelligence is broken down into two segments. You've got interpersonal intelligence and intrapersonal. Interpersonal is emotional intelligence all under the same umbrella of me reading other people's body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, choice of words, and put that all together. That's how we read people. So someone who's acutely aware interpersonally will pick up very quickly if there's a switch in the mood or the tone of voice or the person's body language. And I think most of us have experienced being on the phone with someone and engaged in conversation, and you can tell within a matter of seconds if the person is still physically on the other end of the phone, but you can tell without seeing that their mind has gone somewhere else, not just from the pause, but even from the way they're not responding or are responding to the next part of the conversation. So emotional intelligence has to do with paying attention to the details of what's going on in someone else's little world, at least in the immediate interaction and interface of that person. Someone who's intelligent or gifted, if you want to call it, in interpersonal intelligence, in intrapersonal intelligence, will not just pick up very quickly, but they'll hub. Oh, should I back off? Do they look like they need space? Or should I check in to ask, do you need help? Do you want to be alone with yourself? Or are you looking for support right now? So that's really part of what we mean by interpersonal intelligence. Intrapersonal is acute awareness of what I'm thinking and therefore feeling, such that if I'm intrapersonally not intelligent, I won't pick up quickly. I will not pick up quickly that something bothers me. For whatever reasons, you can analyze it, but if I don't pick up quickly, it might take me weeks, months, or years of therapy till I up that this person or people have been hurting me or taking advantage of me, and I'm not even being aware, and now I become more sensitive and reactive to that abuse, if we're going to use such a word. Or if I'm intrapersonally intelligent, then I am acutely aware, and I pick up very quickly when I notice a change in my mood that's really the result of what I'm thinking, and then hopefully I've got a little bit of space to decide, okay, I know what's going to happen next, I'm going to burst out with anger, or I need to take a time out for myself to readjust or realign myself to my thinking, so I don't get sucked into my thinking, and therefore my anger and frustration, etc. Love is under the umbrella of emotional intelligence, seeing the good in other people. Respect, listening, empathy. You can start looking at the list of all the midas in the area of emotional intelligence, and it basically accounts for so much. Understanding, sense of humor, compassion, giving a second chance. This is a biggie. Generous, even bigger than generous, is not just giving, but forgiving. Whoa! Whoa, that's big. Letting go. Just moving on, letting go. And not making something that just happened bigger than it deserves. Worry, anxiety, fear, these are all under emotional intelligence. They are on the, if you want to call it, the negative side for the most part. But all this falls under the arena of midas. The one I want to focus on right now is based on the verse that we started with. All the days of the poor man are ra'im, bad, plural. V'leiv toiv mishtatamid, but someone who's got a good mind, he's at a constant banquet, he or she. So I'm going to look at simcha for a few moments. Simcha is a very interesting midah. We translate it as happiness, and there are quite a few words for happiness in Lashon HaKodesh. You've got sasan, you've got simcha, there's gila, there's quite a few. Chedva is also a Lashon of simcha. And we're living, I think, in a generation, it goes back even as I was growing up as a kid, where the media is actually selling us on a definition of happiness that is not in God's dictionary. And if it's a definition that's not in God's dictionary, then it's fake. It's not real happiness. And that's a problem, because if I get sold on it and I see it doesn't work, I'm going to keep going for the next version of what I'm being sold on. Example, can happiness ever be something that's outside of me? And that's a very serious question for me to ask. And the basic answer, I'm just cutting to the chase, is there is no happiness outside of me. It's impossible. I'm going to share with you in a few moments. This is what I'll be using with your daughters. So who owns my happiness key? Who actually has the key to my happiness? I'll ask the same question differently. Who's responsible for my happiness? Ultimately, I'm responsible. Do we all agree? Okay, so if I'm responsible for my happiness, I'm going to ask you if you can relate to the following. You know, when I graduate from school, I'm going to be so happy. You know, when I go on my first date, I'll be so happy. You know, when I get out of this date, I'll be so happy. You know, when I get my first job, I'll be so happy. When I get out of this job, I'll be so happy. You know, when I get married, when I get divorced, I'll be so happy. You know, when I have children, I'll be so happy. When I get kids out of the house, I'll be so... One second. If my happiness depends on my boss giving me a raise or more appreciation, who have I set up as controlling my happiness in my career? Me or my boss? If it's a bank manager has come through on the loan, and then I'll be happy we can extend our house finally, or buy that second home for Shabbos, and we work so hard during the week. It could be just such a getaway to have that for the sanity of our family, and then I'll be happy. Who have I defined as controlling my happiness over here? Me or the bank manager? If it's my spouse who has to be more understanding, respectful, and then I'll be happy, who controls my happiness in this relationship? So even though it's clear to us all, I'm responsible for my happiness, but I will so easily give the key to, excuse me, that's my happiness you just took. So, but it's just a misunderstanding of reality. There's no such thing as happiness outside of me. But I'm going to share it with you in the actual words of the Torah and Chazal. We just saw, Kol Yemei Ha'ani, the poor man, all his days are not good. There's always what to complain about. The Toiv Leiv Mishtatamid, but if he's got a good mind, he can actually be poverty-stricken, but it doesn't make a difference because he's looking at the world as, hey, air is free, gravity is free, sunshine is free, I'm alive, I'm above ground. And so ultimately, just counting what's already good in my life actually becomes my happiness bank. And then when I get knocked for, hey, a hostage after 50 plus days is freed, I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing that they have a whole different outlook on the criteria that will make me happy in my life. It's going to be so simple that just even being amongst people, being able to talk freely, walk, make choices of what to eat, will suddenly become so announced in such a pronounced way that it's going to be very difficult to unlearn the lessons of being a hostage and not knowing in that world of uncertainty how will I ever see my loved ones again? Will I ever be amongst society? How long is this going to be for? Circumstances are all invitations for me to pay attention to God's reality. And God actually says, it's a pasuk, forgive me, I speak sometimes to secular audiences, so I don't mean to be disrespectful if I call Hashem G-O-D. The Torah tells me in Parshas Kisavai, is Perek Chavav pasuk Yud Aleph, 26:11. V'samachta b'chol hatov asher nasan lecha Hashem Elokecha. Enjoy, be happy with all the good Hashem's given you. So that's quite strong. The predicate is, if it says, Hashem says, enjoy, be happy, v'samachta, be happy, b'chol hatov, that means there's a lot of tov for me to be paying attention to. Asher nasan lecha Hashem Elokecha, which Hashem has gifted to you. Nasan is always a language of gifting, because God owes me. He owes me nothing. So whatever I have is, I'm not sure if I did this, everyone in this audience was conceived, is that accurate? We were all conceived. Everyone here was not miscarriage, is that correct? Everyone here was not what do you call it when the pregnancy is aborted? Aborted. No one here was aborted. Everyone here was born. No one here was a stillborn. So right here, we already won 5 mega lotteries. We haven't even started living properly yet. It's just 1 second after we're born. Oh, I was conceived. Is that a reason to be happy? Yeah, I exist. I was not aborted. I was not a miscarriage. Not stillborn, and I'm born. Oh, you're born Jewish? OMG! Oh my gosh, born into a frum family? Oh, you're about to you became frum on your own? That's extraordinary. But the problem is not what are the reasons that sabotage my happiness on a daily basis. That's not the problem. The real problem is, am I counting the good that's already in my life? Because Hashem says, "V'samachta b'chol ha'tov," that means there's a lot of tov for me to pay attention to. Asher nasan lecha Hashem Elokecha, which Hashem has already gifted me. So, to bring this out even stronger, we actually said, and Hashem wants us to practice this for 7 days. From the chuppah, for the next 7 days, we're reminded again and again at every single Sheva Brachas. And that is, Asher bara sason v'simcha. 1 second, bara means created. You mean, happiness is not a product? Happiness is not a lifestyle? I mean, all those can add to and give me more reasons to be happy, but they can't be the reasons for my happiness, because then my happiness is hanging on something outside of me, and if that falls away, goodbye happiness. That's terrible. Oh, Asher bara sasan is part of creation. Oh, God actually created happiness? Well, I think I need to understand that a bit better, because happiness is something kind of abstract. I mean, I've got a key for happiness, and I'm going to guard it very. This is mine, by the way. Please don't look at it like you want my happiness. I think I shared with you Oscar Wilde. He once had a great line. He said, "Be yourself. Everyone else is taken." So this is my happiness, and I've got lots of reasons to be happy, but I might not be counting them.
Also, Rabbi,
yes, please.
You could interpret that as like you have to create your own happiness. You can't just hope that happiness finds you.
Yes, yeah. It's plugging into the reasons that already exist, and then it becomes more like you're saying, a training in creating the silver lining where it may not be obvious, because that's going to help me deal with the clouds. That's going to help me deal with the stuff, because the stuff is there. That's part of being in this world, and so I have to go through the stuff, whether it's going through school, getting married, staying married, having children, raising the children, the career, and it's all up down. It's all up down. It's never only up. It's hopefully more up than down, but it's always changing. So then, how do I create my own happiness? So in a certain way, it's a little bit even simpler than me looking for the good. So I'm going to share with you something which is actually right out of the last chapter of Mesilas Yesharim, in last paragraph of chapter 7. Chapter 7 is important to note. for the following reason. The Vilna Gaon, who would count the minutes in a year that he wasted learning or doing mitzvahs, that's how acutely aware he was of interpersonal intelligence, of how he spent his time. When he read Mesilas Yesharim, he read up to the 8th chapter. He said he couldn't find a single wasted word in the first 8 chapters. So I'm quoting to you from the end of the 7th chapter. The Vilna Gaon added on that if the Ramchal were alive in his time, he would walk, and in fact didn't have trains, or he would have walked by foot to Italy from Vilna. That would take a long time, and it's a taking away from a lot of mitzvahs, davening with a minyan and being in a best medrash learning all day, but it would have been worth it to him. So I give you that as an intro because the Ramchal, his words are loaded. And he offers, and this is where I believe we have an expression, fake it till you make it. That expression is really found in the Rishonim. You'll find it in Sefer Chinuch. He talks frequently about the concept that the chitzonius of the mitzvahs we do outwardly affect us inwardly. And it goes vice versa as well. What I'm thinking affects the things I'm doing in the moment. It affects the quality plus or minus. Comes along the Ramchal, and he's talking about simcha. He's talking about wanting to be close to Hashem, and saying even though that's our natural state, because that's the neshama that was infused in our body, and we all want the exact same thing. We want to be in control of our lives, but it doesn't mean really be in control of the family and the kids and the career. That's impossible. It means in control of our true life, which is over here. So that when things work out, I'm grateful. When things don't work out, I'm grateful. When things work out, that's great. I've got more reasons to be happy. When it doesn't work out, wow. Lefum Sara Agra. Now gratitude and simcha takes on a whole new dimension when we find good, even when it's not easy, even when has v'shalom suffering or actual pain. So comes along the Ramchal near the end of chapter 7, the last paragraph. He tells us, Ulam Adam she'ein hachemda hazois lehetes b'karoi. Inwardly, we don't have this burning desire for being happy in Hashem's presence. Eit so toivahi, but it's a very good strategy. Shizaris b'ritzoinoi, like get yourself riled up. Kadeshi mashech mizeh shetivaled boy hachemda b'teva, that you will give birth to this desire that's in your nature that God wired into you. Ki hatanu hachitzoina, pretending to be happy on the outside, you'll see that's what he's referring to. The outward happiness, me'oreres hapanimis, is what gets you excited inwardly. Ubevadai sheyosem mesura b'yadoi, and for sure, it's much easier to grasp hi hachitzoina me'hapanimis, what's going on outside than inside. So if you dance to a groovy tune and music, and you really like the beat, doesn't matter what negative mood a person was in a few seconds ago, the music actually literally picks us up, and we can jump with joy and sing if there are lyrics, and it changes us. And we're just doing something outwardly, but it changes us inwardly. If you deal with what you can that's in front of you, like physically dancing or singing, you will then draw into yourself that which is not necessarily, right now, I'm not in the mood. And I can get myself into that mood. Ki tivaled, these are the words I was looking for. Ki tivaled boy hasimcha hapnimis. You will give birth to the internal happiness. Wow. What he's saying is every human being is pregnant with joy. Tivaled, you will give birth. We can't give birth to something that's not there. Oh, the simcha is already God's reality. It's part of creation. The reasons to be happy already exist. But if I'm not counting them, my mind will easily get stuck in kol yemei ha'ani, because my mind is poor in thinking. So, I was giving a class, so I'm going to give back to multiple intelligence just to close this point. It's so interesting that in the world of multiple intelligence, emotional intelligence, love, giving, respect, forgiving, understanding, empathy, compassion, listening, happiness, all the items that you would clearly list under the category of emotional intelligence, wins hands down over all the others combined. Example, in real life, and that's why the school that you're in, until we get to close to the older grades, then we start more with grades and reports, because we don't want a kid actually thinking, I'm a grade. I'm an A, I'm a B, I'm a C. I'm a C minus. It's a tragedy that a child should actually think that my performance on a test is in any way a definition of who I am. It does show what I did in the moment, but if I had a headache or anxiety or has v'shalom, parents going through a difficult time right now, and I've got certain fears, or dad's business is really not doing well and it's creating a lot of tension in the home, and I'm coming to school not eating properly, or I missed the bus on the day of my test, and I came in late and I'm all like flustered. So the test does not reflect anything other than what I was able to do in that moment. But what I'm actually fully capable of is not reflected in the test. So tests they have their advantage, but they have their limitations too. So comes along Howard Gardner, who popularized emotional intelligence, and this is the thing I'm going to share with you, in the real world. And I'm going to define the real world. Marriage. In the real world, raising children. In the real world, earning a living. What will count the most? Mathematical intelligence? Musical intelligence? Helps. Language intelligence also helps. But what's really going to count the most? Kinesthetic intelligence? Physical intelligence? Spatial intelligence? Or emotional intelligence? You take emotional intelligence on one side of the scale, and all the other intelligences combined, emotional intelligence by far outweighs my preparation for adulthood than anything else I've learned academically or skills for. Is this making sense so far? So it's interesting, that's what midas really are. Midot are measures, but they're also character traits, because the true measure of a human being is character. So Howard Gardner, Dr. Howard Gardner, he got written permission from the actual father of multiple intelligence. The real person, his name is Dr. Peter Salovey. He's actually today the president of Yale. And his sister, who I know personally, she would come to Gateways for Pesach, so she would invite her brother Peter to come to the seminar, and his real name is not Salovey, his real name is Soloveitchik. He changed it to Salovey, and he's the father of multiple intelligence, which when I learned that, and I've had conversations with him, and he freely gave written permission that Howard Gardner almost takes all the credit, and everyone's focused on this person who's really a student and propagator, but not the originator. So that's just a side point. Sometimes you wonder, how much innovation is there outside of the Jewish world? It's really extraordinary how much we have contributed, and of course that's why we're hated so much. So go figure it out. Go figure out the logic. So it's interesting that in the Toichachos of Parshas Kisava, it's the most painful of all our parshas in describing what will happen if we're not keeping Hashem's term, we're thrown out a second time, which did happen. So chapter 28, verse 47, after telling us a listing which accumulates to 98 curses, there's a sudden insert that gives us a clue, spells out the clue for why Has v'Shalom all this could possibly happen to Jewish people. It's like this sudden insert, a very famous line. Tachat, all these curses and all this suffering is in place of, in substitute for, Asher loy avadta et Hashem Elokecha b'simcha. Because I wasn't enjoying being from. That's what it really means. I wasn't serving Hashem b'simcha. And b'simcha, interestingly, I think I touched on this, I'm not sure, please forgive me, I just don't always remember who I've spoken to, or said what to whom. The letters machshava, can you see how they correlate to b'simcha? They share the exact same letters. Because B'Simcha is a state of joy, happiness, but where do you experience that? Pinky, elbow, kneecap, the beautiful aesthetics? No, it's really paying attention to the beautiful aesthetics that I'm enjoying. Oh, I'm enjoying the virtues in my family members. That's why I'm happy with my family. Oh, so B'Simcha is the same letters as Machshava, thought, because that's the only place it really takes place in. So it's possible for someone to be in prison and actually be B'Simcha. I'm not sure if I shared with you Dr. Viktor Frankl in his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. So he was being operated on by the Nazis. He was 6 years in the camps, 4 in Auschwitz, I think it was 2 in Dachau. He lost his wife during the war. He was the father of what's called logotherapy. It's like a Latin word for meaning. He developed this before the war, but even during the war, he actually was writing notes on bathroom paper, whatever it was, and ultimately mental notes of observing people who were the candidates for survival. And he writes in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that the best candidates for survival were not necessarily the ones who arrived off the trains not completely broken and looking robust and strong. He said the candidates for survival were the ones who had a reason to live. It was not correlated to physical strength. It was correlated to, why should I survive? Why should I fight to stay alive? Oh, I want to reunite with my family. Hopefully they're still alive. Or in some cases, many women, they would report that the first time that they had their periods come back after the war, they were so thrilled. Because many inmates were forced to drink soup where the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, would crush glass to sand particles and put it in the soup. And this would cause internal bleeding. This was part of an experiment, and then they would monitor how long it would take for the internal parts of the body to die from the internal bleeding. They had mad, crazy experiments. So for them to discover that they were able to have children after the war had this double irony. Number one, they thought that maybe they would never be able to have children again. And number two, they felt that that was their victory over Hitler, because he tried to destroy the Jewish people, and the Jewish mothers are bringing more children into the world. So the piece I wanted to share with you from Viktor Frankl was where he said he was being experimented upon by the Nazis without anesthetic. They were actually removing a part of his body, and in excruciating pain, he writes, he discovered the ultimate moment of liberation when he realized the Nazis had his body, and they could do anything they wanted. He had no choice of that. They could do anything they wanted with his body. But as long as they didn't have his mind, he could choose whatever meaning he gives life. And it was in that moment he realized he's free and they are slaves. They're slaves to a dogma, and his body is in their hands, but not his mind. And if he doesn't sell his mind to them, he's liberated. So it's an interesting idea that ultimate liberation is really taking place here. And it really matches a very strange wording that we say in evening davening. We say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he took us out of Mitzrayim, he took us lecherus olam. Cherus means freedom. Olam means forever. Excuse me. So Mitzrayim is here, over here on the timeline, but we went through Galus Bavel, and then Galus Pras, and then Galus Yavan, and we're still in Edom, and we've had the Inquisition and the Crusades and the Cossacks and Tsarist Russia and Communist Russia and Jihad. And how can you say that after we came out of Egypt, we had eternal freedom? Because there's two types of freedom. There's physical freedom, but the most important one is not physical freedom, it's what's taking place over here. Am I shackled that this person has my happiness, and when you change, then I'll be happy? But why would I give anyone this key to my happiness? Well, there is a logic, because now it's your fault, and you have to change, and I don't. Because when you change, and then I'll be happy, and then I don't have to look at me. Oh, so it's just my distraction of not needing to look in the mirror. I turn the mirror and make everyone else look, and it's my boss's fault, it's my kid's fault, it's my spouse's fault, it's my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and before you know it, all these people have got a piece of my happiness key, and I'm selling myself short because I am chained to all these things outside of me. Instead of recognizing innocently that I've given that away, but the moment I realize, hey, it's over here, I can let go of the chains. So on that note, I'm going to share with you, here's my diagram, my worry over finances, and I'm not sure if you can tell, but this is actually this is heavy duty chains. I paid the extra money for the heavier ones, and I worry about finances. Like, I don't know, we've just got so many expenses, and if things don't pick up, we're going to just have to downsize in so many areas that we've got used to. But it's not the only thing I feel like shackled to, because my children drive me crazy. I've got neighbors, their children are so cooperative, so respectful. I just don't know what went wrong. I try so hard, my kids drive me crazy. And, this is multiple. I couldn't fit enough on my... Here's my concerns about my spouse, my personal happiness, my health. It's like I've got so many issues with my health. And I just like, after a while, I feel like so chained. I feel like pulled down by all these thoughts. And that's before I even get to my job. I am so fed up. I love my work, but my boss shows me no appreciation. And it filters down to my co-workers, and I've been there for so long, and I hardly get a raise in my salary. It just drives me crazy. I am driving home, and the boss is in the car with me because I'm thinking about him. I go to sleep at night. I'm chained. I can't take it anymore. But the moment I realize, 1 second, who's chaining me? Where am I experiencing this servitude? Oh, it's what I'm thinking that's chaining me to all the things that are hurting me. Also, how far am I away from a new thought? And then what happens? Oh, I don't like doing this in the best method, but oh my gosh, I can stand a bit straighter now. This was very heavy. And the moment I think about it, I'm still only one thought away from letting go. So these are very simple metaphors, both for adults and of course children, to get into our, if you want to call it, wiring. Where do I experience life? Is it really an outside-in paradigm? Or is it only and really always an inside-out paradigm? And the more I actually enjoy the good that is in the people in my life and look for it, then the richer I am and the more my happiness becomes, until this becomes the reality, because it already is. But sometimes I have to act it in order for it to be born, but it's there. That simcha is always there. Much more to be said on the subject, but I'll leave it open to any questions or comments. Yes?
Sorry, just going back to your point about the Chayos La'olam after Mitzrayim.
Yes.
What happened with that? What happened with us leaving Mitzrayim that changed our emotional setting that meant that even though we're in Golos throughout history, we free our minds?
So,
what was different before Mitzrayim and after Mitzrayim?
So before, when you say before Mitzrayim, in servitude of Mitzrayim, in actual Golos Mitzrayim, or before Golos
Mitzrayim?
Yeah.
So that was like the forever freedom that accompanied us through all Golos. So what was different with that Golos?
I mean, what was different about Golos Mitzrayim?
As in, when we came out of Mitzrayim,
Yes.
we had this forever freedom.
Yes.
How did we go in?
So the Chayrus that's referred to is really the Torah God gave us, because it's through the Torah that, so to speak, as Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Ein ben chayrin el misha oisek b'Torah. So a person's not really free unless he's engaged in Torah, which just doesn't mean sitting in kollel. It means that the Torah is sitting inside his mind. It's over here, and if it goes in here, then Ezehu Gibor, who is a truly strong person. So it doesn't say Charles Atlas, I don't know if that was a name that was still in your time, or some very Rambo character. No, Ezehu giba koivesh et yitzro, the person who controls his mind. Yitzro refers to the negative part of my thinking. Oh, he's controlling his negative thinking. I don't mean negative versus positive. I'm talking about where the Torah gives me a list of, sinner, that's negative thinking. Natira, bearing a grudge, remembering other people's mistakes. Revenge, kinna, jealousy, etc. So, Cherus Olam is the Torah. So that helps us explain why Galus Yavan was called Galus. That's weird. Babel, we were outside Eretz Yisrael. We were in Babel, duh. Galus Pras, the Persian Empire. We were not in Eretz Yisrael. Oh, Galus Yavan, where were we?
In Israel.
We were in Eretz Yisrael. So how do our sages call it Galus? That's not exile. Because they're referring to the much worse Galus. I could be living in Eretz Yisrael, but if my mind is not on God, I am in Galus. If God's not in my world, it doesn't matter where I am. But if God is inside my mind, then it also doesn't matter where I am. So ultimately, Yavan was a horrific Galus because there was blurring of values, worship of the body, worship competition, worship of food, glorifying the physical world. It was such a huge distraction from. They didn't even want us to learn Hebrew. They were replacing it with Greek letters, which is it's a dead language, literally. I mean, it's all Greek to me anyway. But it's a dead language, but it was even then. God's language is the only language which is his dictionary of reality. So that's where our freedom really comes from. Yes?
So I feel like, I could be wrong, but with adults, we're very complex. So our happiness is like you showed, the chains of the different things that
Yes.
make up our lives. With kids, I find it's a little bit harder, or maybe it's just my kids, to pinpoint their unhappiness. Like when a kid says to me, not saying of course, I don't want to go to school.
Right.
And then he tells me, oh, my friends are mean to me. Is it the friends? Is it something else? Like it's harder to really articulate for them and for them to understand what is making them
Right.
unhappy or anxious. How do you recommend we break it down with our kids so that they can see a picture of you're in control? You can't
Right.
be blaming other things
Right.
for how you feel.
So there's a few ways to approach this. One is you're welcome to take as being part of this book here, which has all the metaphors that I'm sharing with you. They're listed in the second half of the book. The first half of the book is more showing you that every single midah that's described in the Torah is really what we're thinking. Children need vocabulary. One of the greatest things that you can see this yourself, that in the first 2 years after a child is born, you really would be expecting great things from them, being that they start off as a microscopic brain and heart and created their physical body in a matter of 9 months. It's extraordinary what they did. And then when they came out of the womb, they're basically silent except for crying for hunger, food, drink, pain. And they're saying, well, this kid is like completely dependent on me. Okay, when they start crawling, there's a new level of independence, and then walking, oh my gosh, running, and then you got to keep your house all childproof. I just actually finished making my house completely childproof, but they're still getting in. So, pure humor, no reflection on reality whatsoever. So, children need vocabulary, and in the first 2 years of their life, they are picking up every single word and image and making associations. You will find, I'm saying very broad strokes, older children sometimes have less vocabulary than the younger children, where the younger were born into a family of 3, 4, 5, 6 or more children, and they hear conversations, sometimes in more than one language, and they pick up more than one language in those first 2 years. So children's minds, it's so interesting that they are developing their vocabulary bank. So I'm going to share something with you which I think might help a little bit. There was a Marva Collins. She was a very famous educator. She was asked by several presidents of America to be like head of education in America, but she didn't want to leave the classroom. But she worked in the slums of Chicago with preschoolers, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. It was a multi-age classroom, not deliberately so, it was more like for economics. But she held these kids in her classroom. Almost without exception, there wasn't a single kid in the class who knew for sure who his father was, if he was alive. Most of them were born out of wedlock. Fathers were either in prison or killed by gangs. Their older brothers and siblings were in gangs. And their whole world was one of competition, violence, and one-upmanship. And if you were to put a scale of 0 to 10, how much do parents value education, it would be either a round number or somewhere on the minus scale. So this lady, Marva Collins, she was about 6'2" tall, quite imposing, but she had a tough personality, but she would start off the earth to 5-6-year-olds. She would say, if you want to be losers, you don't belong in my class. If you want to be successful, I'm going to help you. And the way she would do it is she would talk to them with the same vocabulary she would talk to an adult. And she would say, Thomas, what does circumference mean? I don't know, man. Thomas, the circumference is a line around a circle. David, what's the circumference? Man, a line around a circle. And she would every time she would say a word that she assumed they don't know, sophisticated. She would give them the definition, write it on the board, and she would spot check throughout the day and that week the vocabulary that she was choosing. And what ended up happening is very interesting. About 25 words a week were new words. And they kept reviewing these new words. And gradually what ended up happening is these children started having new words in their mind to enable them to talk to themselves about what they're experiencing. And what that ended up happening is that they matured and became naturally curious, because all children really are, but then their environment was not supporting it till she became their head teacher all day. She was the one that was helping them build a vocabulary that enabled them to understand. So in this particular case, I'll give you an example. When you gave an example, let's say, of bullying. So I will actually be touching, maybe even next week, if you want me to, I'm going to enter the arena of bullying because it has such an interesting impact on children when we unpack who are all the players in the bully formula, and then the children, we give them a vocabulary to understand the roles of each one of those players. There's really 3 people, and one of those 3 has 3 roles as well. One of them is, of course, the bully. The other one is the victim. Nowadays, they want to call them a target, traumatizing to call them a victim. And the third one is, of course, the bystander. There are 3 bystanders. Bystander number 1 agrees with the bully. Bystander number 2 does not agree with the bully, but is too afraid to stand up to the bully. He doesn't want to become the next victim. Bystander number 3 is so outraged by the injustice, she stands up to the bully. And so by giving children I'm giving you just here headlines. We'll talk, when we get into this, it'll be more detailed. By giving children vocabulary, they are able to communicate with themselves, and therefore much better to the adults who are trying to draw out. And then I can have a much, if you want to call it, more intelligent, detailed conversation where they're able to draw upon the vocabulary necessary to articulate what they're going through. So that's a little bit of a helpful answer. It's 1 o'clock. I will respect your time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
Yes.
good.